For centuries, people have found the minds of criminals to be intriguing, mysterious, and sometimes entertaining. Because of this, the last few decades have been filled with TV interviews with killers and psychopaths to give the audience a quick glimpse into the minds of criminals. Even for convicts that are seen as pure evil, interviews give even more in-depth proof of that assumption. Number 5. From June 1984 until August of 1985, Richard Ramirez terrorized the Los Angeles area with a spree of home invasions. The break-ins were highly publicized, and every news outlet and paper stand spread details of the latest invasion. Honestly, the city was sent into a bit of a craze and feared that they were next on the Night Stalkers list, a name given to Ramirez by local media. Most of Ramirez's crimes were the purpose of pure evil, with his end goal being to assault but sometimes even murder his victims. He used a wide variety of weapons, including handguns, knives, and a machete, a tire iron, and a hammer. During the spree of his Night Stalker crimes, he beat and shot most of his victims. Some cases were considered more brutal than others, but almost every crime he committed ended in murder. Some believe that the Night Stalker did not work alone, and some evidence would also suggest another criminal was at the scene. Even upon confessing to his crimes, Ramirez never admitted to an accomplice, though. By August 20th, 1985, there was a national manhunt in the works for Ramirez. He took a bus to Tucson, Arizona, and found that he was the criminal every newsstand across America was whispering about. Before his eventual capture, Ramirez successfully became a notorious household name. It's no surprise that in every interview conducted with him, it caused a massive response from the public. Although the audience hated and even feared the man, there was a sense of fandom as families gathered around the TV to hear the latest excuses the Night Stalker could stir up in his latest interview. In this interview, host Mike Watkist interviews Ramirez from his new home in prison. In the interview, the two discussed Ramirez's 14 murder charges of which he was found guilty. While the interviewer tries to avoid details that are too gruesome for the general audience, he does elicit a very peculiar response from the Night Stalker. Ramirez explains that he's evil, but that the media has painted an unreal picture of just how evil he is. Ramirez tries to steer clear of any incriminating statements, but he does admit that the country is in a state of violence despite what he's done. He even finds it surprising that the public had formed him into such a spectacle. Overall, the most unsettling fact that can be read from Ramirez's body language is that he didn't seem to be bothered, scared, upset, or remorseful at all. He really treated the interview with a lot of sarcasm and declined to even offer a possible motive for his heinous crimes.
You admit to being evil, Richard?
We are all evil in some form or another, are we not? Yes, I am evil. Not 100%, but I am evil.
What do you want the world to know about you?
The world has been fed many lies about me. I have read very few truths.
Who are you?
Just a guy. Just a guy.
Number 4. Any mother will tell you that the idea of harming their own children for any reason is unthinkable. Even when it comes to discipline, many mothers describe it as emotionally draining to inflict pain upon their children or cause them any sadness. So it's safe to say that most mothers found the crimes of Diane Downs as absolutely unfathomable and disturbing. Diane had 3 children that most of her family would claim that she loved very deeply. Christy Ann, Cheryl Lynn, and Stephen Daniel were the names of these children. In addition, Diane gave birth to a child she named Jennifer through surrogacy, who she then handed to the rightful parents shortly after birth. On May 19, 1983, Diane rushed to an emergency room with her 3 children who'd been shot. 7-year-old Cheryl was already dead from her bullet wounds, 3-year-old Danny was paralyzed from the waist down, and 9-year-old Christy had suffered a disabling stroke, all as a result of some random wild shooting which Diane went on to report to police. Diane had actually been shot in her own arm as well, but the wound was not critical. Diane told officers and the hospital that the wounds were caused by a crazed driver who intercepted the family on a small dirt road. It's unclear what the man's alleged motive was, but he didn't get what he wanted, so he shot the family and fled the scene. After this, Diane rushed her family frantically to the hospital. Of course, officials found discrepancies in Diane's story and began to question its validity. Diane seemed to change her story just slightly between each retelling. Switching a detail as simple as the color of the criminal's car may seem insignificant, but it's a telltale sign during a crime report that proves the supposed victim may be lying. Aside from her changing her story, officials noticed that Diane was oddly calm considering that she just allegedly survived such a traumatic attack. Finally, an important detail that tipped off police was that doctors described Diane's bullet wound as self-inflicted, considering the angle in which it hit her. Eventually, officers became suspicious that Diane may have been the bad guy in this story. After an arrest and a trial, it was discovered that Diane killed her children because she wanted to continue an affair with the man and didn't want to be in the life of her husband anymore or her own life as she had too many children. Of course, Diane fought that theory even after her conviction. In this interview, Diane denies everything that the jury had already found to be true, and at one point even says, "If I was going to kill my children, don't you think I would have done a better job of it?" referring to the fact that she brought her children to the hospital. Despite this statement being in defense of her own innocence, it comes off rather creepy and implies that Diane is aware she didn't do a good job of killing her children. In this interview, much like any other with Diane, she seems absolutely bored. She shows no emotion, in which psychologists say is a sign of a true criminal psychopath. She also occasionally smiles at the interviewer despite the situation clearly not calling for it. There's another interview which occurred more recently with Diane, in which she's much older, and in this interview she speaks to officers in charge of the hearing with much more passion in her voice. Some claim that Diane has finally come to realize the weight of her actions. Others believe that she's just learned to put on a better show. Either way, both interviews with the young mother show an evil and unsettling side to a woman desperate for a man's attention.
I guess sightseeing, I guess you'd say. And the kids got tired. They fell asleep in the car, so I decided to just head on home. But I saw a road I hadn't been on before. We like to take back roads. And just went down that road, and there was a guy standing in the road, flagging me down, so I stopped. Everything was done in a matter of 5 or 10 seconds. He swung himself around and fired twice. One caught me in the arm, the other one I went off somewhere. Danny cried the whole way. I could hear him softly just moaning, and Christy was dying. God, all the blood, all the pain.
Number 3. There's a collection of serial killers from the past 100 years that have committed horrible crimes which label them as evil individuals. Serial killer Edie Kemper takes a medal for being one of the worst in history, though. Despite his celebrity status not being quite as big as other killers like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer, he has a horrific resume under his belt, and much of the footage from his interviews can be used as textbook signs of a twisted man. Most of Ed's victims were college students, but he also murdered his mother and grandparents. Ed was indicted on 8 counts of murder originally, and on November 8, 1973, Edie Kemper was found guilty of all accounts against him. The conditions of his crimes were absolutely brutal, and often involved torture, sexual assault, and necrophilia. Clearly, this sick man was not normal, but he was seen as even more strange and confusing when he personally requested the death penalty, and specifically asked to be tortured. At the time, there was a law that had ended capital punishment, so Kemper was sentenced instead to 7 life sentences plus an additional 55 years. Later, Kemper admitted to actually committing at least 14 murders. While evidence could not be collected for the remaining murders, they did find information about one in which he was sent back to trial and received an 8th life sentence. This 1984 interview with the notorious Edie Kemper is known as No Apparent Motive. This segment is part of a feature-length mini-documentary on Kemper and his crimes. In this interview, he goes into gruesome detail about his crimes, which is disturbing enough on its own. To really crank up the creep factor, though, it provides the viewer with a clear analysis of what an evil man with absolutely no regrets looks like. Kemper explains the conditions of his crimes and explains how he was able to kidnap 2 young girls by turning on his charm and effectively covering his tracks. At one point, Kemper explained that he was cutting off the heads of his victims and would often cut them off in the front yard of his mother's home, but that he had established such a cover-up with this seemingly charming personality that he was able to go undetected. It's quite common that serial killers have the ability to hide their true nature as a manipulation tactic, but Kemper's own awareness of this tactic adds to just how unsettling his crimes truly were. Poor young women trusted the kind of man on the side of the road, which eventually led to their demise.
Well, I'm not an expert. I'm not an authority. I'm someone who has been a murderer for almost 20 years.
Can you say how many people might be doing crimes like you were doing?
It would be a guess, but it's not. It's far more than 35. It isn't that impossible in this society. It happens.
Are there more people?
They didn't give up.
How many?
She didn't give up. I did. I came in out of the cold. And what I'm saying is there are some people who prefer it in the cold.
Good people see.
A nice guy.
Number 2. Michele Blair was a woman who's also known as Freezer Mom, and the reason behind this nickname is truly unsettling. In 2015, it was discovered that Michele Blair had killed her oldest 2 children and threw their bodies into a freezer where they laid for several months. After the crimes had been uncovered, many questions filled the minds of viewers across the nation. In a court trial, Blair admitted to her crimes and pleaded guilty. She also gave the judge, prosecutors, and jury every gruesome detail they needed to convict her. Despite the fact that she owned up to her own guilt, she showed no remorse and even described that she was proud of what she'd done. Apparently, Blair found that her actions were justified as she referred to her deceased children as demons. Blair claimed that she had found her daughter and oldest child, Stoney, sexually assaulting her younger brother, Blair's youngest son. When she discovered this, she beat Stoney by punching and kicking her. She also scalded her skin with hot boiling water and eventually put a grocery bag over her head. When the job was done, she threw her daughter into a freezer and ignored her corpse for over a year. Blair claimed that there was no excuse for sexual assault and that she intended to kill her. Later, Blair allegedly discovered that her son Stephen had also been sexually assaulting her youngest child, along with the daughter, and even after her death. Blair put Stephen through the same punishment, and in court she said, "I didn't mean to kill Stephen, but I know my actions did lead to his death. I didn't mean to kill him, but if I did mean to, I would be proud of it." This interview with Michele Blair explores some of her reasoning behind her crimes, and in it she claims she isn't crazy, and that there was no logical point of the punishment. She also said that she would kill her kids again if given the chance.
Can you talk me through the type of abuse that you had to suffer as a kid?
You mean sexual abuse?
If that's what happened?
That definitely did happen to me. That's why I know exactly how would have grew up. I told my mother what happened to me, and the only thing she said was, "It's over with, so what the you want me to do about it?" What do you mean what I want you to do? You get what I'm saying? So all I could do is go back and sit in my room and just sit there and look stupid. I'm a kid, and I'm just telling you what happened to me, and you didn't do about it. And plus I still had to see the person coming in and out my house. You still friends with that person.
So do you believe that the violent person you went on to become you were a product of your own childhood?
I mean, everybody have choices, so I can't just blame all that on my mom because I was still an adult. Maybe I should have tried hard to get over that. But anybody who knows me, that touching the kids, the molesting, that no.
Number 1. This interview may not be with a killer. However, Beth Thomas did commit unsettling acts against her other children. Beth Thomas is the center of the documentary titled Child of Rage. The film, which was released in 1992, studies Beth, who'd been the victim of abuse after being adopted. Due to the abuse and neglect that Beth faced as an infant and toddler, she would attack her younger brother, often hurting him intentionally. She also exhibited anger, rage, and violence against her parents. Many of the interviews with this young girl in the documentary are upsetting and take the viewer down a dark road that they may not be ready for. It's easy to call this child's actions evil, and some viewers may even see her as evil herself. However, a professional child psychologist explained in the research that Beth was unfortunately just a product of her environment. In this specific interview clip, Beth explains to the interviewer that her brother is afraid of her because she hurt him on purpose. She says that she stabbed her younger brother in an attempt to kill him because she didn't want to be around him. She also discusses the hatred she had for her parents and how she hurt her own pets on several occasions. Overall, this interview paints Beth as sadistic, evil, and unforgivable. The purpose of this documentary, however, was to educate that children who may seem evil and filled with rage often just need the proper mental health care. Beth went on to succeed in her recovery and now lives a normal life as a nurse, who instead of constantly trying to harm those around her, helps save lives. Still, many will agree that this initial interview with the child is not only concerning, but downright creepy.
Are people afraid of you, Beth?
Uh-huh.
Who's afraid of you, Beth?
John.
Your brother. And why is your brother afraid of you?
Because I hurt him so much.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And at nighttime, what do your parents do to your door?
Lock it shut.
Why do they lock it shut?
Because they don't want me to hurt John.
Right. And they're kind of afraid of hurting John? Of you hurting John?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Are they afraid that you might hurt them?
Yep.
Would you, Beth?
Mm-hmm.
When would you do it?
Nighttime.
Okay. Why would you do nighttime?
Because I don't like them seeing me do it. But they can feel me do it.
Mm-hmm. And what would you do to them, Beth?
Stab them.
Okay. What would you stab them with?
A knife.
Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep updated with our videos. And if you enjoyed this narration, maybe consider checking out my personal channel at youtube.com/ty_knots.